This episode of MBS is for the ladies. It's going to be on Spartan women before the Roman conquest. So before I get into the subject, I want to give credit to where it's due, and that's to Sarah B. Pomeroy, who's written much work on the subject of ancient Greece, and particularly on women in ancient Greece. I have a piece of work just over here to give you an instance of it. Also, a lot of what I'm talking about today is from her work on Spartan women. It's a very good piece, and I would recommend it to anyone interested in the subject of women in antiquity, and specifically on Spartan women. So to begin, being born in Sparta. So unlike most of Greece, where child-rearing was done so by the father, in Sparta it was determined by the state. It was the state that would determine the baby's vitality. So shortly after the child is born, the mother would take the child and bathe it in unmixed wine. This was to determine if the child was strong enough. Thus, if it had an epileptic seizure or if it was sickly, she would notice right away while it's being mixed in the wine, which sounds absolutely atrocious. So after this, the child would be given to the father, who brought it before the Drosa. I think I'm butchering that name, and I apologize. This is the Elder Council of Sparta. They will decide if the vitality of the child fits and it should go on to survive. This was done so to see if the child would become a great male soldier or a strong female who would birth more soldiers. So, if the child was unfit, if he looked puny or deformed, he would be thrown into the chasm of Mount Tegedos to die with the rest of the broken bones of the infants down there. It's a very sad and disgusting image. Female babies were not always put under this scrutiny. It was more so directed at male babies. Also, something to point out, once the childs get past this stage of their life, they're fed equally, both male and female. You're probably asking yourselves, why am I making a note of this? Well, in most ancient cultures and for ancient Greece, females were underfed for most of their development because it was just determined that males should get more food because they were going to be the more significant, stronger sex that would determine the fates of the future generations. So now we get to the point in their lives where they're about to be educated. And this is going to be around the age of 7. In modern Western culture, schooling is mandatory, as you may have already known. For most of the ancient world and for Greece, the father of the child prescribed what kind of education the child would get. But for Sparta, like today in the Western civilization, it was state determined and it was mandatory. So all children received the same education, and this went for both males and females, and this was done under state supervision. The purpose of education was to first produce male hoplites. This is the soldiers of Sparta. And also, for the females, this was to produce strong mothers who would produce male hoplites. So the end goal was always to produce more perfect soldiers. Now, for males, at the age of 7, they're cast away from their families. They're going to live in barracks with other men until the age of 30 years old. So the women lived at home and had some privacy and leisure time alongside their mothers. For both sexes, the physical education would be quite harsh and arduous. Plutarch tells us that this was in the form of racing, wrestling, discus throwing, and hurling the javelin. Xenophon tells us that Lycurgus, the legendary man who formed the first laws of Sparta, instituted physical training for women to be no less than for men, including competitions of strength. They trained together and were separated, given the ancient scholar you read from, because they differ. Plato and Xenophon tell us that they were separated into single-sex herds. Though it is known during times in which they were racing, like in honor of Helen, 240 maidens rubbed their nude bodies in oil as they, alongside the men, raced together across the Iretus. Did I mention that they were in the nude? Yes. Spartan women did all their athletics in the nude, and sometimes oiled up in the presence of all the males, which is quite unique in the ancient Greek world. Sometimes they were also lightly dressed. And this had to do with their religious practice, initiatory rites, erotic stimulation for the males around, and for athletic prowess, because they're trying to show that they are strong and fit. Athletic prowess, you say? Why did they run naked? Well, for the Spartans, it was more aerodynamic, and it made best for racing. If you compare it today, let's say for the Olympics, it's about the same as us wearing our Spandex suits while we're running. On top of this, Spartan women were taught hunting skills, such as using the javelin. Meat was a very important part of the Spartan diet for both sexes. Might I also note that the first female star in the Greek athletics was a Spartan. Hope I don't butcher her name. Cyniska, daughter of Entrepnid. Her horses had won victories at Olympia, and at the age of 50, she had won later in 396 BC and then again in 392 BC. Now, combat training. It is unclear if Spartan women were trained for actual combat. Is it true that the education was co-ed? We don't know this for certain, because ancient scholars differ on this account. Plato and Aristotle both complained that despite their physical education, Spartan women would have been no better at defending their country than other Greek women. But evidence suggests that when the Thebans invaded Sparta under Uponendes in 369 BC, the women were terrified and panicked because their state had never suffered an invasion before. But evidence of when King Pyrrhus planned an invasion of Sparta in 272 BC, the females helped the males dig out trenches the day before because King Pyrrhus had a major force of elephants. Now, during the night, the females told the males to go to bed early so they'd be ripe and ready to fight, while the females dug all the trenches themselves. So when the morning came, the females were there cheering on their men and the army to fight on, which just goes to show the physical prowess of Spartan women. Spartan women were also taught music, which was essential for their religion. They were taught to dance, sing, and play instruments. Some of these dances were the Kordax and the Bibliasis. I think I said that right, but I'm not sure. Spartan women were also taught horsemanship, as Sparta was renowned for breeding and racing horses. Women rode horses, drove horse vehicles, and took part in competition. This was not only uncommon in ancient Greece, but in a lot of areas it was unheard of a woman to ever ride a horse. Weaving is a huge topic when speaking about Spartan women. Spartan women were technically liberated of this because of the helot system, which was a slave system. Lycurgus, when he was placing the laws in Sparta, decreed that the only cloth needed for all of Sparta would be supplied by the douliae. These were the slave women, the helots, thus liberating the Spartan women from weaving and other forms of domestic work, although they did weave things from time and time again. These were for religious purposes. Now let's talk about marriage. For women, this would usually happen almost immediately after their graduation from their education, roughly around the age of 20 years old. For males, they would get married probably around the age of 25. This is extremely important to note because in most of Greece, women typically could be married off at, the age of 14 to men, double or 3 times their age. But for Sparta, Lycurgus, when he was forming the laws, decided that couples should marry in their prime. He also took away the male rights to have exclusive sexual access to his wife. What I'm talking about when I say this is when an older man was guarding a younger wife in Sparta, he would actually have to go and look for a younger prime male to impregnate her, because for Lycurgus, it was important that both people who were making the child were physically fit and at the best stage of their life. Now, another part of this marriage compact is women could have what is called a double husbanding. This is when they took on 2 oikoia. Oikoia is a word for husbands. This was done so males could have children who would have brothers to share their inheritance together and grow up. For Spartans were not concerned with illegitimate childbirths or economic aspects through marriage. It was always about the state and for making the perfect hoplite soldier. So ladies, you could have 2 ripe young men. Now, how did they get married? This is where the famous secret marriage custom comes into play, something I've been looking forward to speaking about for a while. This isn't the case for nobles, but for most Spartans, this is how it was done. So, the bride, being fully warned prior by her bridesmaids, would be captured by them. They would shave her head to the scalp, dress her like a man in a cloak and sandals, and lay her upon a mattress in the dark in her home. The bridegroom, who was not allowed to be drunk during these events, this is very important because he can't be impotent, having dined previously in the mess hall with his other male friends and soldiers, would slip in to this dark room and untie her belt and carry her to bed. After spending some time with her, he would depart discreetly so as to not disturb the sleep of anyone in the house, to not be caught. And he would make his way back to his barracks, where he would sleep where he always does. Because remember, males would be in the barracks until the age of 30. Now he would do this for a few days in secrecy, embarrassed and fearful if he was ever caught by anyone in the house. His bride would spend most of her time scheming into ways where they could ease this process and sneak him into the house. Now this could go on for a short period or as long as it took to have children before the day the man ever saw his wife in daylight. Now this was all done because Lucretius believed moderation would be the most fertile way to have children, and they would always be fresh for lovemaking. Notes about this, like I had said, the bride was always told beforehand that she was going to be captured, because this was a captured bride's thing. It was also possible if she didn't like the idea of this guy, she could struggle and, object. And she's a Spartan woman. Like, this is not some kind of princess. She could fight. So if she wanted to, she could stop this whole thing by beating up everyone involved. Now, why was this custom done in such a way to shave her head down and dress her up in male clothes? This was probably done to aid the Spartan male, who was very used to homosexual sex in the barracks, having lived there till the age of 30 with just men. Oh my. It is also important to note that female hair length was associated with status. So when you became somebody's wife and got married, cutting your hair short was a necessity, and it was to show your status. So on the subject of female Spartan sexuality, I'd like to note that there's no reason to believe that Spartan women were sexually repressed, like most women in Greece at that time. Plutarch tells us Spartan women exercised in the nude and would often be flirtatious towards the males, especially bachelors, to entice marriage. Xenophon tells us Spartan women took the initiative in husband doubling arrangements when they took on two husbands. This was for the sake of producing children who would inherit from more than one father. Cicero tells us plainly that Spartan women controlled their own fertility, and this is extremely uncommon for ancient Greece. So let's get down to the fashion. Spartan women wore the chiton or the doris. For Sparta, this was called the peplos. I have no idea if I said any of those words right. I hope so. I apologize for this lack of good quality picture, but it's the best I could find for a background. So, this peplos was a right-hand side cut and quite short dress, as you can see here, that showed the side of the woman, as well as, most importantly, her thighs, which Spartan women specifically like to show off, to show their physical features. Spartan women were considered to be more loosely dressed compared to their Greek counterparts. There's actually a famous phrase for Spartan women in which they dress like a Dorian girl, in a single garment open at the side. What this meant was they were promiscuous, and they had quite a name for themselves in the ancient Greek world. Spartan women also wore sandals and military boots, depending on the activity, and young women wore their long hair and did not cover it. If married, they were not allowed to wear long hair, of course, because they would be cutting it short to show their status. Now for nutrition. Remember, I had said Spartan women were to be fed no less than males. So, Spartan women were reported to be quite tall, thus aiding in the notion that they had very good food rations. Spartan women were the only Greek women who were fed and able to drink wine, with approval, of course. The Spartan diet consisted of barley, wine, cheese, grains, and meats. Spartan women were in control of the food distribution in the household, although they did no cooking or cleaning. The helots, the slaves, would do this for them. It was gravely important for a Spartan mother to make sure her daughter was well fed. Spartan women were also the only few Greek women allowed to drink wine, as I had previously mentioned. This is very important to note, as it was very disapproved in ancient Greece. Now the economy. Until the Hellenistic period, Sparta had no coin money or a cash economy. Instead, land was the most valuable commodity, to which Laconia was among the most fertile. In almost all Greek city-states, no woman could own land or manage substantial amounts of wealth. Spartan women and men were versatile producers, however. Essentially, they were owners and managers of land and consumers of wealth based upon it, based off of the slave labor by their helots, I should mention. I hope I'll do an episode soon on this atrocious system and how barbaric it was. Anyways, Plutarch tells us the state distribute parcels of land to be used for a man's lifetime. Lucerigus distributed 9,000 kleroi, that's a plot of land, of the state in equal shares. The conquered people, those who fell to Sparta, were the ones who became helots, the slaves, and they were the ones who would work these lands that the Spartans owned. While Spartan women were not assigned a klero at birth like their male counterparts, they received all of its benefits through male relatives or later through marriage. Spartan men could also give their kleros to anyone they wished to, which would usually be their wife. Aristotle actually criticized the Spartan system, for which women could be permitted to own land or manage their own property and exercise authority in the family. By Aristotle's time, Spartan women owned nearly 2/5 of the land in Laconia as a result of the male population dwindling in Sparta. Spartan women were also highly educated and encouraged to handle business transactions, mostly for when their husbands were away, because remember, the husbands were usually out at war. So who was taking care of the kleros while the husbands were out playing? The women. The women were actually the ones quite in charge of the estate and managing everything. So, societal and political power. Spartan wives managed their husband's kleros and thus were responsible for his social status. Spartan women, like most Greek women, did not directly speak in public assemblies. However, Spartan women could influence political matters using their economic power. According to Aristotle, who had a lot of criticism for women in antiquity, Lacedaemonian Spartan women defeated the intention of the Spartan constitution because the wives of warriors would gain the estates at the loss of their husbands. Basically, he's pointing towards how rampant war and the male population dwindling put so much power in the Spartan women's hands. Despite this, Spartan women enforced societal norms in Sparta. This was when they openly jeered at cowardice or bachelors. Did I not mention that you were supposed to be ashamed of being a bachelor in Sparta? Males were basically forced to marry out of being ashamed of being bachelors because it was seen as one of the greatest shameful manners. Now for religion. All Greeks worshiped the same gods and generally did so in the same ways, but emphasis on these gods varied from place to place. Spartans emphasized female beauty, health, and fertility. As a part of a religious experience, Spartan women would sing, dance, feast, and race while dedicating offerings. They also drove chariots and wove clothing in the images of the gods. Some of the gods worshipped in Sparta were Apollo, Demeter, goddess of agriculture and woman life cycle, Athena, Aphrodite, and Artemis. Artemis was worshipped throughout Greece as a divinity who brought fertility to humans, animals, and protected mother and child. In Sparta, Artemis is associated with Orthia, a nature goddess over plants and animal life. Sometimes Spartan women would perform lewd dances in honor of Artemis and Orthia, such as the Calibides and the Calibidia. I have no idea if I cited those right. So to finish this off, why don't we talk about some important Spartan women. Let's start off with, of course, Helen of Troy / Sparta. Daughter of Zeus and Lydia, considered the most beautiful woman in the world. By marriage, she was queen of Laconia and wife to Menelaus. She brought upon the Trojan War, in which Prince Paris of Troy had stolen her from her husband, Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Another one, Gorgo, the daughter of Cleomenes I and wife to King Leonidas I of the Brave 300. She was one of the first Spartan women reputed to have drawn attention to the special identity of Spartan women. When asked by a woman of Attica, "Why is it that you Spartans are the only women who can rule men?" she replied, "This is because we are the only women who give birth to men." And Sininska, who was the first woman in history to win at the ancient Olympic Games, who had said, "I am the only woman in all of Greece to have won this Olympic crown." This concludes my piece on Spartan women. And I did this piece because I had noticed that 40% of the people watching my content are women. So I hope this was of interest to you, and I would like to see you reaching out. Did you like this piece? Would you like to hear more pieces, and what would you like to hear? Please send me messages, emails, or comments below on the YouTube channel. I have further information, and honestly I would like to talk about more subjects involving women because they go quite unnoticed in history, as we all know. Both genders experienced history, yet for some reason the historical books always shadow over the course and regular life of women during, let's say, ancient Greece. Would you like to perhaps hear about other Greek city-states during this time, like, let's say, Athens? And how did the average day woman get by in Athens compared to her counterpart in Sparta? I'd be happy to do more content like this, and I'm hoping to hear from you soon.